Byte Tips.
Welcome to another Tech Byte Tips video. In this video we're going to be addressing this comment that was requested. It was a very interesting comment for me because I was not aware of this application named GlueTun, and this person is basically saying, you know, they like the videos and they would like to see a video on GlueTun. He wants a simple video on how to use QBitTorrent. He's trying to find a better way to make sure that it's secured, and he can also use port forwarding. And he says that so far he's using private internet access. Everything requires like using SSH or something to set everything up, and if he finds it intimidating and hard. So let's try to see if we can kind of help give some more details into this question and how useful is that application, because I was pleasantly surprised as to how useful it is. If you go into github.com/qdm12/GlueTun, you'll find the repository for this application. This is basically described by the author as a lightweight Swiss knife-like VPN client for multiple VPN service providers. In simple words, it's an application that can let you configure from a list of different VPN providers easily in a container. And it's a pretty interesting app. The person has a video here on YouTube. You can go and check it out if you want, where he basically describes his approach to creating this container, the concerns that he had, etc. And one of the things he said, he wanted the container to be very secure minded, which is very important. And he also wanted people to be able to easily have access to configuring a VPN, but with many different providers, because not all the providers work the same way. So he wanted to make sure that it would work for a lot of different providers, and he got sponsored by many of these providers. And he also wanted to enable that container to work like a VPN proxy. So basically you can connect other things. It could be containers or full machines or virtual machines in your network to that container and use it as a proxy. So all your traffic is routed through that container to a VPN provider that you configured. So I found that this application is actually very useful. It's very, smart the way he thought about it. And yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a great application if you can use it. It's based on the Alpine operating system, so it's a very small image, very, very small. And he has currently support for a lot of VPN providers. You can see here in the list. Many of them are very, very famous, like Private Internet Access, Viper VPN, Surfshark. You'll see a lot of videos of ads for those on YouTube. And he's using OpenVPN to set up all the VPN providers in this container, because they all support it. And he is also working with WireGuard too, but that's for certain VPNs, not for all of them. And he wants also to provide additional things that you can do, like DNS over TLS and things like that. That's something that he wanted, because usually DNS is sent unencrypted, and he wanted also to make sure that he could protect his DNS queries basically over a secure connection. So that's another security minded feature. And yeah, he also wanted to implement for example, ad blocking and surveillance and malicious URLs that are usually part of VPN providers. For example, I know Private Internet Access also provides you that, where you can block the ads. They call it Private Internet Access Maze. And yeah, you can use the UDP or TCP protocol. It has a kill switch built in, so that's really good. You can also use shadow socks proxy to even obfuscate your connection more. It has the HTTP proxy built in to it. So there's a lot of good features into this. You can come here and look at the docs and read more about it. And one of the main things is that you can connect other containers and other devices to it. So it is very useful if you're running containers. For example, in our video series. We wanted to have like a torrenting client where we wanted the traffic encrypted through a VPN, so we know nobody's snooping into what we're downloading or sharing with people, etc. So this is really good for that. And he has here an example Docker Compose file that you can use to deploy this in your Docker system, and that's it. The document is just that, but if you go into the details here, you see more information, the feature and setup and stuff. It has more details. He has a whole website dedicated to that. So yes, now let's talk a little bit about how that actually works. So I have a little PowerPoint here. So imagine that we're talking about a home network here. This is this big square. Inside that home network, we have a container computer, so I mean a computer that is running containers, and in that container we have QBitTorrent, for example, or transmission or something like that, but we don't have a VPN. So what we're doing is literally we're opening a direct connection to the public internet, and that's dangerous because your ISP can see all that you are doing, your IP is exposed through the peer-to-peer network, etc., etc. So that's a big no-no if you're going to be torrenting, right? So what we did to fix this, we used a QBitTorrent image that had a built-in VPN in it, and that is a safe way to do that because the torrent traffic is routed through our VPN provider, and all of our traffic goes from our IP into our VPN provider's IP, and it goes secured, you know, with SSL. So that traffic cannot be seen, like they cannot see what's in that traffic from anywhere. And then once that traffic reaches the VPN provider, then it can go out into the public internet and everything will be working fine. So this is safe, this is good. So what does GlueTun do here? We're already safe. What's the benefit of that? Well, let's see that. If we have GlueTun, we can see here that we have the ability, first of all, to connect directly to our VPN from this GlueTun container. And this container can serve as a proxy for other containers in our system, or even other computers or virtual machines in our network. So for example, if you had plain QBitTorrent in a container that doesn't have a VPN, you could actually connect that into GlueTun so that all the traffic from this container goes through the GlueTun container, which then routes all the traffic through the VPN provider. But there's a big advantage here. Since GlueTun has support for many different VPN providers, you can configure it to work with the VPN provider that you have without having to struggle with finding certificates and OpenVPN files and stuff like that. So you just basically provide your provider's credential, and then he already has that configured to do that. And another nice thing is that within the configuration of GlueTun, you can tell it connect to a specific VPN server. For example, I want to connect to, I don't know, Mexico, or I want to connect to Canada, or I want to connect to Germany, or I want to connect to Taiwan or Japan. And it'll do that. If you specify it, it'll always connect through that VPN. But if you don't specify a specific city or region, then it just grabs any from the whole list of servers that the VPN provider has. So the first time GlueTun starts, it could connect to the US, and then the next time it starts, it could connect to Canada, or the next time it starts, it could connect to Australia. So you will always change your server and IP. That's also very good for your privacy. So that's one of the benefits of having GlueTun here. Another benefit is that you can have any kind of container, multiple containers connecting to it, and none of them need to have any VPN client installed within the container. So they just connect directly here, they become part of the GlueTun network, and then everything in the traffic is going to be sent through your VPN provider, and from there it goes to the public internet. So that's the main benefit. That's the whole point that the creator of GlueTun had in mind, and it's actually a really good idea. I love how it works. It just there are some things that make it difficult to run in a Synology NAS, and we're gonna cover that in a bit. But you can run it in a Synology NAS. It's just that it's more complicated. You cannot rely on the user interface to do things like we were doing in the series before. Before we continue ahead, I want to address some issues regarding the GlueTun application and the use case that was presented by the person in the comment. The first thing is they were mentioning port forwarding. They said that they were using private torrent indexing sites that require port forwarding. In my experience, I have used private torrent sites and I've never had to do port forwarding. It was not a request. Usually the only rule that they had was more concerning not being a leecher. That means if you download something, also keep it up and share it with people so your ratio remains above a certain threshold that they want. And another thing that they usually don't want you is to have your torrent client configured to allow local discovery of peers and stuff like that. They only want peers to be able to join the pool from their own accounts, so they're authorized and you know who you have in the pool of people sharing and downloading. So that's the first thing, right, from my experience. Secondly, the creator of GlueTun has also said that port forwarding only works right now with private internet access, and it's sketchy. It doesn't really work very well, so he really doesn't even recommend using it unless you really have to try to get that. So I would say, honestly, check that out. Try to figure out why they are telling you that you need to forward ports, because it's very rare. It's not a normal ask. The second thing from the comment that I want to address is that the person said that installing this app and getting it set up was, intimidating, because it looks like you have to, do SSH and run commands and stuff like that. And unfortunately, even in the Synology NAS, that's still the case. I'm going to explain how you can do it, but I'm going to explain why it's done that way, right? The way GlueTun works is that GlueTun becomes the proxy for your other containers, right? So like I explained here, other containers have to join GlueTun's network, right? Within Docker, you can do that. You can say that a container can connect to another container to route its traffic, right? But unfortunately, in the Synology web user interface, that's not an option that you have. Let's go in here and try to start a new QBitTorrent, for example. Do I have the regular one here? Oh, never mind. Let's just grab any. When you start a torrent, the first thing that you see here is that when you're in the network, you only have two options. Your options are use the bridge network, which is what we do by default, or use the same network as a Docker host, which is basically you can't edit anything after you create a container. But if you notice, there is no option here that allows you to join, for example, a service from another container or another container's network. So that's essential for GlueTun to work. So you cannot do that in the user interface because you don't have that option. So it'll be good, I don't know if many people decide to write to Synology to see if they are willing to implement that in their user interface, because you can do it from the command line, but they haven't implemented that in the user interface. So that's what makes it complicated. That's what makes it hard, and that's why you have to do SSH, and that's why you have to run Docker Compose and commands like that. The third thing, which is already related to that, is, GlueTun becomes the network. So since you cannot do that in the user interface, it causes the QBitTorrent container to not auto start if you restart your NAS, for example. Because when we go through this video, we're going to be able to create the GlueTun container and a QBitTorrent container using the command line. But if we restart our NAS, when we come here into our Docker user interface and we go into the containers, we're gonna see that the GlueTun container is running, but the QBitTorrent one, it's not running, and it gives you a weird error. And you're like, what does this mean? And the problem is that the user interface doesn't know about a container network, so it cannot start the torrent because it doesn't see that it has a network attached to that container. So if you need to restart that container, then you have to log into the NAS again using SSH and then run the Docker command to restart that container. So that's an annoyance. So if you definitely need to use GlueTun and you're okay with constantly logging into your NAS and running those commands, then this will work for you. If you're trying to find a way to do this all through the user interface, unfortunately, as of now, it won't happen because Synology has not implemented that container network option. We can see here that we only have host and bridge, and we can't really do anything else. There's no option anywhere where you can specify a container as a network. Okay, so let's get to actually deploying the two containers and seeing that in action and how we can do it. Fortunately, some other person has already figured it out and written a good guide on how to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the link to this URL where you can use this guide to do what I'm just going to do. We are going to create a Docker Compose file that is going to specify the two containers that we're going to run. One of them is GlueTun, the other one is QBitTorrent, and he gives you here an example of all that you need to get it running. So let's go into our code where I have already copied that and made some changes myself. So here's some comments for easier understanding. We're going to have services defined. One of them is going to be the GlueTun container. The other one is going to be the QBitTorrent container. For the GlueTun container, we're going to be using the QMC Go GlueTun, which is the developer's personal repository. So that's the official image. We're going to name it GlueTun, and we're going to give it net administrator capabilities. That's so that it can manage the network tunnel interface. And we're going to pass that interface to the container. And then we're going to say that we're going to be listening on port 8888. If you need to use shadow socks, and you specify that port, and that port for TCP and UDP, and then the port for QBitTorrent. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the proxy, the HTTP proxy if you need it. And this is the actual QBitTorrent port that we have to expose from GlueTun, because remember that when we normally create the user interface, we expose that port on the QBitTorrent, right? But we're going to be joining our QBitTorrent to the network of our GlueTun. So now we have to expose it from GlueTun's network. So that's why we expose the port of QBitTorrent in GlueTun. Okay, so that's kind of confusing, but I hope I clarified it there. And then in here, we just specify a volume for the GlueTun configuration stuff. We have the usual environment variables, which is the 1026 for the user ID, 100 for the group, and then here's important. In this example, we're using private internet access. Here we specify private internet access as the name of the VPN service provider, right? If not, then you have to specify the name of your provider. You can get that from a file that gets created in the GlueTun folder when you run it for the first time if you don't know. And the connection type is OpenVPN, and in here you have to specify your VPN user and password for your VPN provider. And here you have the option of specifying if you want to always connect to a specific region, for example. In this case, if we leave that, we're saying connect to US Washington DC all the time. If you don't specify this, then it'll connect to any server that the VPN provider has. So I left this here so for you to see, but on the actual file that I have put in the NAS, it's removed so that we can see that it can connect to wherever it pleases. And here's the time zone that we usually put as an environment variable. Here's other things that you can do if you need it. If you want to enable HTTP proxy, you can do that here. If you want to use shadow socks, you can also enable it here. And here you have to specify your home network so that your subnet is included here in the outbound subnets. And that's it for the environment variables. And this container is going to be on the bridge network because this is the one that is actually going to be working normally. And yeah, we just say restart unless stopped, and that's basically it. Then for the QBitTorrent container, we're going to be using the Linux server QBitTorrent image. We're going to name it QBitTorrent. We're going to give it the user ID of 1026, group ID 100, time zone America, New York, and the web port 8080. But that's not going to be exposed, so you don't see that we're putting a port there directly for that port. Just telling the QBitTorrent application that it should use the port 8080 for its web user interface. In here, then we would mount the volume for our config file. And for example, if you have separate folders for your downloads and your media, then you would put one for each. But if you have it all merged into one, then you would put that one folder. And in here's the trick. Here's the part that causes problem in Synology because it cannot be implemented in the user interface. The network mode, instead of being a bridge, which is the normal, if you see, it's saying you have to connect to a service that is provided by the GlueTun container. So it's going to connect through GlueTun. And once that's done, then all the traffic is going to go through GlueTun. And then we say, okay, restart unless stopped. So that's all that we need. So what we need to do is we need to grab this file and we need to put it into our NAS. So what I do is I usually go into File Station and I put it in the Docker folder. I named it QBitTorrent-GlueTun.YAML. And I know that it's here now. So when I SSH into the NAS, I know where to find it. So now in the guide, basically once we have that, he's basically giving you details about all the information that I just described. So let's just skip through that a little bit. And here's the next part. Now you have to SSH into the NAS so that then you can do the Docker compose, which is the command that you run to execute that Docker configuration that you wrote in that file. So for that, first thing we need to do, we go into our NAS, we go into the control panel, we go into terminal and SNMP, enable SSH, apply that, and now that we have done that, we should be able to open a command prompt window and then do SSH and then a user in our NAS, that is the administrator, and then the IP of our NAS or the name of the NAS, and that should get us inside the NAS. As you can see, I am connected to the NAS. So let's clear this. If we go into the volume 1, sorry, and then Docker, dear God, Docker lowercase, there we go, and we see the files here, we have the QBitTorrent GlueTun YAML file that I was mentioning before. So now we're ready to then follow the guide and continue the process and executing the file that we created so that it builds our infrastructure. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we've already cd'd into that location. So now we're just going to run that command that says sudo, so do as a super user, docker compose file, that's the -f, and then we specified the name of that file that we created, and then we say up because we want to get that infrastructure up and working, and then D to run as daemon. And then we run this, prompt for our password, and then it says it's pulling the GlueTun image from the repository. After that, it should also pull the image for QBitTorrent, so we can see it's pulling that image too. And then once it has both images downloaded from the public Docker Hub repository, it will then create the containers with all the specifications that we gave it in that file. Let's clear this and run that command again. It should be faster now because all the images have been downloaded. So starting GlueTun, done. It means that that container was created and it started. And creating QBitTorrent, we have another problem. Why? Because I did not create that. So, but at least we have something here. The Servers.json file that I was mentioning before. So we're gonna take a look at that. But let's also fix the problem with the other one, which was Docker QBitTorrent. So let's create a folder here called QBitTorrent. Let's OK that, and let us for now go into our NAS, go into that GlueTun folder and open this servers.json file. This is very, very interesting, and this guy is a very smart person. So he has all of the configurations for all of the different VPN providers, and this is what he uses to connect to the VPN. So that's why you don't have to provide an OpenVPN file, you don't have to provide a certificate, you don't have to provide a key or anything like that. You just provide your username and your password. And it'll look in here, and for example, so if you're using AirVPN, then you see here that AirVPN has a whole section of different connections that it has available. And you keep on scrolling down because this is pretty big. But you will see other providers. Let's say, for example, that I'm gonna look for private internet access. Come on, down. Oh, if I look down, then it'll find it. So here's another section for private internet access. And in here you can see it has other regions: Australia, Brisbane, Australia, Melbourne, etc. You keep going down and you'll find other countries: Andorra, Argentina. And but you would use the name that we mentioned here, which is private internet access. If we were using AirVPN, it would have been AirVPN. If you're using Surfshark, for example, then you would look for Surfshark, and that's the name that you specify as your provider. So you would go into this list and look for your provider in here, and then you'll know exactly what you need to put to configure it. And then you'll see all the options that you have available for the regions and stuff. So if you want a specific region, come here, look for the one that you want, and then you can put that there and it'll work. Okay, that was what I wanted to show on this part. So now we have both folders. So now let's run that again. That should now work properly. And let's see. Oh, let me just remove everything. Oh, down without the D. There we go. Now it stops everything, and now we can do the up again and then run the full thing working properly so that it creates and it's creating GlueTun, and that's done. And now it should start creating the QBitTorrent container. And it's done. So now everything should be done, should be working. So let's go really quickly here into the interface here and check here with GlueTun. We only have that file there. QBitTorrent has all its stuff here, which is good. So everything's looking fine here. Means the container's running fine. And if we go into Docker and we go here, we see QBitTorrent running. The interesting thing is that GlueTun doesn't show up this time, but it is running also. So you can validate that the connectivity is going well through the VPN by going into the terminal, opening a new session here, and then running this command does a quick retrieval of information about your public IP. So we do wget -q capital O dash https://ipinfo.io, and that tells us that we are allegedly in Singapore, and the IP that we have is this. I definitely do not live in Singapore, so that lets me know that my QBitTorrent is using the connection from GlueTun, which is actually connected to Singapore through my VPN provider. So as you can see, if you don't specify a server, it'll pick any. It can be anywhere in the world. But as long as you can come in here into your QBitTorrent, open a terminal, run this command, and see that the IP and the region is very different from yours, then you know it's working. And the good thing is that the GlueTun container has a built-in like kill switch, so if the connection drops, nothing gets leaked out, so you don't have to worry. But as you can see, it is working. So let's get out of here. Let's close the terminals. Yes. And it's kind of interesting that it did not show me GlueTun here, but it should show up. Let me see if I refresh. No, that didn't. Anyway, I'm going to restart the NAS because I'm going to show you what happens when you restart the NAS, which is due to the problem with the network configuration not being allowed in the user interface. So let's restart, and we'll be back in a little bit when it's done. Alright, our NAS has restarted. We can go here into Docker because it takes a little bit longer to load Docker after we do this. So let's wait a little bit for it to load, and then we'll see the containers, and hopefully we'll see, there we go, we see GlueTun, which is what I was saying. It's running fine. So if we go into GlueTun and we go into terminal and we create a new terminal with GlueTun, oh, I think, yeah, it doesn't have bash, so we have to use a shell. So bin shell, and then we should be able to run that same command from before, and that should get us the details. -qo https://ipinfo.io. And once again, we restarted, the container started again, so now we're connected to Luxembourg instead of Singapore. So if you don't specify a region, it's going to connect wherever it can from your VPN provider. But it's working, you can see that there. GlueTun is working. Now, what happens? Here's what I told you. QBitTorrent is stopped. Oh, I don't think I edited this. I needed to remove something here. Yeah, this port should not have been assigned to this one. Yep. That's why the error came on this one instead of the other one. But the QBitTorrent one still is not working. And if we try to see the details, we'll see that the network is blank. We don't have a network. So contrary to others, like GlueTun for example, GlueTun has the bridge network. But that private network that we said in the config file that connects QBitTorrent to GlueTun doesn't exist in the user interface. So what it happens is, since it has no network, the Synology system, when it loads, apparently the user interface takes priority over whatever you have configured using the command line, and it stops. So you have to log into the Synology NAS again and then start the container yourself. So that's what I was trying to explain before, that then you know, if you restart, you probably have to log into the NAS, and then you have to start the QBitTorrent container because that's not going to be working. But as you can see, GlueTun was. So if you have anything that was supposed to connect to GlueTun, all of those connections would have gone through our VPN that is currently in Luxembourg and Europe. So hopefully this video is helpful to you. I'm going to put the link in the description for that guide on how to do this. Please remember that if you like the content, I do not monetize this channel, so I will really appreciate it if you like it and you subscribe to the channel. That'll make it be more accessible to other people. And if you want to support me to create more content that you'll find useful, you are free to donate using PayPal or using Bitcoin in the links that are in the description below. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much. Take good care.